Welcome friends this evening. My name is Brahmachari Devendra. With me is Brahmachari Vineet. We'll be sharing with you this evening from this app, Autobiography, Yogi Daily Wisdom. So today we'll be taking about, today is May 18th, so we'll be taking about 1 week ahead and 1 week backward, whatever the reading is there from this app. So I have taken a couple of reading and Vineet has taken a couple of reading, and we'll be discussing with you, sharing with you this evening. This is the reading from Autobiography Yogi, chapter 44, which is called With Mahatma Gandhi at Wardha. The reading is May 21st, today's reading, 3 days later reading. One should forgive under any injury. It has been said that the continuation of a species is due to man's being forgiving. Forgiveness is holiness. By forgiveness, the universe is held together. Forgiveness is the might of the mighty. Forgiveness is sacrifice. Forgiveness is the quiet of mind. Forgiveness and gentleness are the qualities of the self-possessed. They represent eternal virtue. So much has been emphasized in this line, in these lines about forgiveness. And if you see Autobiography Yogi, it is full of forgiveness. So many stories are there. Couple of stories that I like, that when Master Yogananda ji, he was running away from his home, and at one of the station he met a policeman, and policeman was telling the story that how he found a sadhu, and the policeman thought that the sadhu was thief because they were trying to catch a famous thief in that area. And while they were chasing the sadhu, the policeman had an axe and they threw on the sadhu, and the sadhu's arm was basically severed completely. And the sadhu, he stopped, he took his arm, he basically put it back, and his policemen were very terrified, oh, they did a mistake. And so they were asking the sadhu, please forgive me. And the sadhu is saying, there is no point. Come back here in 2 days and my hands will be completely healed. There's no point of asking for forgiveness. My child, go. You did not do a mistake. Go back. So come in 2 days. And 2 days later, these two policemen come and they meet sadhu there under the tree, and they see his hand was completely healed. There was no scare at all at his shoulders. And another story of Sadashiva, that Sadashiva was a famous South Indian saint who was walking naked in one of the Muslim family's house, basically a tent. And when the ladies saw this saint Sadashiva walking naked in the tent, so they started shouting. And then one of the Muslim man who came, and he threw an axe on Sadashiva, and again his shoulder was severed, and Sadashiva picked up his arm, and he again put it back, and then he started walking. The Muslim man realized that he made a mistake. He prostrated himself completely to the saint, and there was no thinking. The point in the stories are, there no thinking about I forgive you, or thinking about any affirmations about forgive, but it was a complete forgiveness at the moment. There was no thinking even about it. Master, one of the disciples asked Master, he did a mistake. He asked Master, but you will forgive me. And Master says, what else can I do? I will forgive you. That's my nature. And so we see that it is our nature, it is our true nature, that forgiveness exists. We don't have to even make an effort to do that. Christ, when he was being crucified, the last word he said that, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he had so much love so he did not even blink about thinking about forgiveness, but he said that. And it was from his soul that he was saying. Let's understand for the moment what does it mean by forgiveness. As we know that, as they say, anger hurts most those who have the anger, not the person whom we are giving the anger. In the same way also, when we hold the grudges, resentment, bitterness about other people, it hurts us most than the other people. So the best is to release it, to forgive other people, release the anger, release the forgiveness. And what does it mean by forgiveness? Let's understand what does it not mean by forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean that we accept people's mistake, we approve their mistakes. It doesn't mean by that. Forgiveness does not mean that we are complaining, at the same time we are blessing other people, at the same time that I'm forgiving you, but at the same time we have resentment, we have the grudges also. It does not mean by that. Forgiveness does not mean that, okay, with the time, as time passes by, I'll forgive you. That is the most easiest thing, as most people do, that as time passes by, they forgive people. But that's the least degree of forgiveness one can do. So what does it mean by forgiveness? Forgiveness means that knowing that everybody makes a mistake. And in that reality, we forgive other people. We all make a mistake. Forgiveness means that people have the potential, they will correct themselves. Nobody is going to make mistake forever. So this is called the spiritual maturity. Swami Ananda defined maturity means knowing other people's reality as they are, not as we think. So that means forgiveness. The highest meaning of forgiveness is to, in God's love, we offer other people's mistake. We don't hold any grudges, but we offer everything in God's love. So that's the highest meaning of forgiveness. Now, there is a line which says, to forgive is to be forgiven. To forgive is to be forgiven. Whatever mistakes I have made, if I forgive other people, I will be forgiven too. So that's a very important point, that to forgive is to be forgiven. Now, how are we going to be forgiven? That's the important thing. That first we forgive ourselves, then we will be able to forgive other people. That's a very important point here. Now, what does it mean by that we are not able to forgive ourselves? When we identify ourselves with the lower natures, our lower tendencies, and not able to identify ourselves with our higher nature, that means that we are not able to forgive ourselves. When we shift that to identify more ourselves with our higher nature, that means then we begin to forgive ourselves in the highest reality. As we identify ourselves in the higher nature, we begin to connect with God, we begin to connect with the divine. And when we begin to do that, then we will be able to forgive other people. So it's first, we must connect ourselves with our highest nature. And then as we are able to do it, as we are able to hold God's love, then we will be able to forgive other people in every moment. We don't have to go and live with those grudges or with the resentment. But in the moment, that like those sadhus, we'll be able to forgive other people in that moment. But that comes with the practice. We must start practicing with the small little things. Master said that how often there are two friends, they are friends for 20 years. A small little single mistakes, and that ruins the whole friendship of 20 years. And that is not the spiritual maturity. We must have that depth in ourselves to forgive ourselves, to forgive other people. And that comes with the practice of meditation, that relating ourselves not with our lower nature, but first knowing ourselves that we are the higher nature, that we are the soul. And with that capacity, we will be able to forgive other people.
Thank you, Devendra ji. There were some beautiful stories. So I would like to read the quote from May 15. And this might interest some of those who have deep interest in music. So the quote goes, "The deeper aim of the earthly rishi musicians was to blend the singer with the cosmic song which can be heard through awakening of man's occult spinal centers. Indian music is a subjective, spiritual and individualistic art aiming not at symphonic brilliance but at personal harmony with the oversoul." I really enjoyed this word rishi musicians when I read this quote. And when I read this quote, it made me reflect about the modern day music, which we call it, and it reminded me of a story which Swamiji would sometimes say during his satsangs and talks when talking about music. He said that he said the story about a lady who had a near-death experience. So when this lady had a near-death experience, for some time she had left her body and she had entered the astral world. And it was not a very pleasant place. It was, maybe you can say, the lower astral planes. And I'm not getting the story right, but when this lady reached there, she saw there were many souls around, but the music which she heard there, or the vibration which was felt there, was very similar to the modern day rock or metal music. And every once in a while there'll be a shaft of light which would come there, and there would be people around and they couldn't even lift their eyes up. They would just look down with no conscious awareness of what is going on. And then, but this lady saw the light, she walked towards it, entered it, and came back to life. And since then, it was her mission in life to educate people the impact that music has on everyone's life. On the spiritual path, music becomes much more relevant. I believe many of you who are watching online, almost all of you must be having a meditative practice. And even a little practice of meditation makes you sensitive to music. I remember very early on the path when I started meditating, and just almost within 2 months I realized I had deleted almost all songs other than Swamiji's songs in my phone. All the modern songs, one might call it. Do I mean to say that other music is bad? Well, not necessarily, but they have a kind of vibration in them which doesn't really help us in growing spiritually. Recently, a group of us went to a place which had, I might say, very loud and heavy music. And I found myself getting really jittery. And it was very loud, and I had to be exposed to that kind of music for quite a while, I must say. And I found, oh my God, these beats are really, hitting my nerves. And after this experience, I walked with some friends and we went into the car. And most of us have Swamiji's music, which plays in our cars or in our houses. And the moment he turned on the music, I felt my nerves just feeling calm, just being soothed, and it was feeling as if it is being healed from all the torture it had to go through by listening to that heavy music. Well, if you find yourself that, no, I still like the modern music, I don't say no, it's wrong, it's bad or something, but try it for yourself what it does to your consciousness. It's good to always experiment. I would experiment sometimes listening to, initially, not now, I don't need any experimentation with music, at least that kind of music when I do, what does it do to my consciousness, and in comparison, what Swamiji's music do, or any uplifting music do to your consciousness. How do you know which is good music? Well, like Master says in this, the aim of early Rishi musicians was to blend with the singer with the cosmic sound which can be heard through awakening of man's occult spinal centers. So if you can have an uplifting feeling, if you can tune into the vibration of Om, Swamiji would say every music he made was in tune with Om. What a statement. Every piece of music which he made. And you can feel that. I remember a friend of mine was once mentioning that he was listening to some music which was not, I think some movie or something like that, which he enjoyed before. But he found that he was getting into a mood, and then he felt, oh, I was feeling good and suddenly I'm not feeling good. How is that happening? And nothing major has shifted outside. Not that someone came and yelled at him or nothing outside his life had happened. It was just music. He felt, okay, let me try listening to some other music. And he happened to play the next song, and he played, it was Swamiji's song, but this song was not at all in English, it was in Italian. And he listened to the song, he didn't understand a word of it because it was in Italian and he didn't understand Italian. But he was sharing with me the conscious effect I felt, and like, it was just so uplifting that I could make the difference with just listening to it and not still understanding a word of it. So I would encourage that, why not tune into good music? And when we chant, when we sing, we'll feel God's consciousness more and more in our life. And who knows, we might also become Rishi musicians. And just one last story I would like to share. I recently met one very famous musician named Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma, and we happened to gift him a book which is Autobiography of a Yogi. And when we gifted him this book, he said, "Oh, I've read this book before." And one of my friends remarked, he said, "Master Paramahansa Yogananda ji had written 4 pages about Indian classical music and how it is uplifting to one's consciousness." And he said, "Oh yes, I have read it over and over again." And then later this friend of mine asked about his performance which he was going to do in a few months. And he said, "Sir, so how are you going to play? Have you decided the theme? Have you decided what are you going to play?" He said, "Spiritual music is very different from other types of music." And my friend asked, "Sir, can you explain how?" He said, "In other types of performances, you rehearse, you practice, you play with the team over and over, decide every note what is going to be played. But in this spiritual Indian classical music, you tune into your guru and you ask, you rehearse, you do your practice, you do your sadhana, but then on the day of performance, you invite your guru and ask him to play through you." And that is how we want to be. We want our guru to play our life, to play every action which we do in our life. I'll pass it over to Devendra.
Thank you, Vineet. So this is May 22nd. This is from chapter 16, Outwitting the Stars. God is harmony. The devotee who attunes himself will never perform any action amiss. His activities will be correctly and naturally timed to accord with astrological law. After deep prayer and meditation, he is in touch with his divine consciousness. There is no greater power than that inward protection. Now the first line here is, probably this is Yukteswar is saying, God is harmony. The devotee who attunes himself will never perform any action amiss. That when we are in tune with God, that we will see that all around us there will be harmony, there will be love, there will be kindness. And when we see that these things starts disturbing somehow, if they are going a different direction, probably then we should understand that there is something wrong there. One of the highest example I take Master's Paramahansa Yoganandaji's stories when he came to India, that he was walking somewhere near Calcutta or somewhere, and he saw there was a crying happening in someone's house. And Master was telling this story later on to Dr. Lewis, and Master went to this house and there was a dead body, there was a dead person there, and Master basically, he raised this person from dead to alive. Now, Dr. Lewis asked him, Master, why did you go to that house? Because you wanted to do that? And Master said, no, because God wanted me to do that. And we can see this is the highest example that a God realized Master, he is not doing his will because his will is God's will. That whatever he does, it's come from God. It's not their own will. It's not anymore their will is left. It's only God's will is left. And so the next line when it says that when we do God's will, everything around us will be harmonized. Everything will be in perfect harmony. Nothing will be amiss. And whatever action we'll be taking, it will be perfect at the moment. We don't have to decide. It will come right at the moment. The second line he says, after deep prayer and meditation, he is in touch with divine consciousness. There is no greater power than that inward protection. That again, that when we attune ourselves with God, that is the greatest protection. Again, I can explain that by an example, by a story that Master told Dr. Lewis that when you are in Om, nothing can touch you. You will be always protected. And so Dr. Lewis, he was in the ocean one time, and he was in the boat, and he was deep in the ocean. He has gone far, and he saw there was a storm coming, and he got very frightened that he's not going to reach shore, and that storm was big. and the board started shaking and everything started, uh, he was not feeling good at all. So, but he remembered at the moment, Master had told him, when you are in Om, nothing can touch you. So what he did, instead of getting fearful, getting frightened, he lied down on the boat and closed his ear, and he, just like the Om technique many of you practice, he started to practice Om technique. He began to hear Om, and at that moment, he felt that the storm is subsiding and he reached on the shore. He went back to his home. His home was on the beach, and he at the moment he entered the house, there was a telephone call. The telephone was ringing, and he picked up the phone, and there was Master other side, and Master was saying, "Doctor, didn't you get wet? Didn't you almost get wet?" And Dr. Lewis was surprised. How come Master know? But Master knew everything. So that means that when you are in commune with God, when you are in divine communion with Om, with the light, nothing can touch us. Of course, death will come. That does not mean that we will not die. We have to leave the physical body. But it is our greatest protection that if you are in tune with God, if you are in sound of Om, in the light, will be protected. So that is our greatest protection for us. Don't think that protection will come from securities, from money, from different things. It will not come. It will only come, the greatest protection only come from God, in communion with God.
So this next reading is from May 17, again from the same chapter 16, Outwitting the Stars. It is never a question of belief. The only scientific attitude one can take on any subject is whether it is true. The law of gravitation worked as efficiently before Newton as after him. The cosmos would be fairly chaotic if its laws could not operate without the sanction of human belief. So, like Sri Yukteswar has quite a sense of humor here, and he says this in this chapter in the very beginning when he told Yogananda ji that maybe you should get astrological amulet, astrological bangle, and Yogananda ji said that, should I? But I don't believe in astrology. And when I was reading this, the very first line which this quote said that it is never a question of belief, I was reminded of Swamiji telling the difference between faith versus belief. And he would sometimes say that people believed that the world was flat, but then that didn't make the world flat. And similarly, the law of gravity operated as well before Newton as it did after him. So then, what are we trying to do on the spiritual path? To know the truth, to know what really is true. And how do we know what is true? Or how can we put our faith on something? Until we experiment, until we test. If there is a hypothesis, until we test it, how do we know if the hypothesis is true or not? For example, Swamiji gave a talk in Australia and someone came to Swamiji and he said, your talk was good, but you speak about God. I don't believe in God. What do you have to tell me? And Swamiji said, think of God as the highest potential you can imagine for yourself. I'm not getting the words exactly, but he said, think of God as the highest potential. Well, if you don't believe in God, well, I think most of you believe in God, but sometimes there comes a time in our life where we feel tested and we don't feel God's presence in our hearts. It's a good time to test it. Tell Master, tell your Guru, tell God, I feel or I don't feel you. You have to prove that you are here. Swamiji would say that so many times people just casually pass by, not exactly his word, but he would indicate that people would not make an effort to say that God is there or not. They would just pass by, oh, he's not there because I have not seen him. Well, test it. Test it for a week. Test it for a day, for 24 hours. If you just test and hold your thought upmost and offer everything to God, you will feel God's response. At Ananda, like most of us, when we see Guru Bhais, so many times we see that people's prayers were answered just at the moment, just when there was a need. Well, how does that happen if there was no God? And similarly, well, it is not a question of belief. It is a question of deep faith, a deep feeling deep within our hearts. And how can we increase it? Then it becomes a question. How do we know anything is true? The more and more we go deep into it. I'm suddenly reminded of an experiment I did when I came onto the path, when I learned the Hong Sau technique of meditation, for concentrating, and which most of you must have learned, or if you have not, do try and learn. So I was told this technique helps you in meditating deeper, and I had already had some meditation practice, but very crazy meditation practice. I could hardly concentrate, and I was told you can feel peace, you can feel bliss, and I said okay. And then I finished my class, I came back home, and I practiced very sincerely every day this technique, and I was feeling so much bliss, so much peace. And I said, wait a minute, now is this because of the meditation, or is this because it's just happening? I said, okay, now I'm not going to be practicing for some time. Believe it or not, for the next few days when I did not practice, I had moods, I was going crazy, I was getting angry, and then I just had to come back to the technique. So I tested it. So like Sri Yukteswarji says over here, the only scientific attitude one can take on any subject is whether it is true. So try if it's true, and if it's true, just stick to it and go with it. And then the cosmos would be fairly chaotic if its laws could not operate without the sanction of human belief. We can believe many things. Sometimes we are surrounded by people who have opinions, but how does it hardly matter? How does it matter? If we know that our Guru wants us to do something, if we know that God wants us to take an action, like Swamiji said wrote in one of his songs, walk like a man, go on alone. If you know that it is true, go on alone, walk like a man.
This is from May 25th from the app. Chapter 16, Outwitting the Stars. By a number of means, by prayer, by willpower, by yoga meditation, by consultation with the saints, by use of astrological bangles, the adverse effects of past wrongs can be minimized or nullified. So here Sri Yukteswarji is giving the tools and techniques through which we can transform our karmas. The karmas are not fixed. It can be changed also, and especially by spiritual practices. If we make, Sri Yukteswarji had a line, he used to say that past life of all men are filled, or we can add women also, past life of all men are filled with dark shames. Everything in future will improve if you make the spiritual effort now. So it's for the people who are practicing, who are spiritual. Things can change. And people who are worldly, they don't make spiritual practices, for them things will remain fixed. But as we come on the spiritual path, as we make spiritual efforts, things can really change, and Guru's grace can come also. But here Sri Yukteswarji is giving the effort we have to make. Of course, Guru's grace is also there. So he says by prayer. Now prayer in itself, that is a whole subject. What is a scientific way of praying? That praying with the concentration, praying with the calmness. After meditation, Master said that the power of the prayer is 1,000 times, he says that, when the mind is calm. Then he says willpower. A worldly person, their willpower is not, sometimes people do have a strong willpower, but most people don't have strong willpower. Their willpower is only mechanical, guided by habits and tendencies. But person who is spiritual, their willpower is very dynamic and in tune with the divine, and the power becomes infinite. So by willpower we can change, we can reduce our karmas. By yoga meditation, when we calm our mind, by Kriya Yoga meditation, we can burn our karmas, the seeds of the past karmas, we can really burn it, we can change it. We can change our desires, we can transmute our desire from worldly to the spiritual. By consultation with saints, he says that, there is a saying in the Vedas, they say that 1 moment spent in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. That even just a moment, if you spent a company of a saint, it can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. So that speaks the power of the saints, that saints and satsangs also, having a guru also, that's so much important. And then last thing he says that by use of astrological bangles, that again there is a science. This is from the chapter of the outfitting the stars. There is a science that how we can strengthen our aura, that the harmful radiations which are coming from the planets, they won't affect us if we were not wearing the bangles. There are so many stories. I don't have time right now. Otherwise, there are so many stories people have told, incredible stories that how they were saved by wearing the bangles. So by doing all that, not just wearing the bangles, but doing all that by the prayer, by the meditation, by the using willpower, by living in the company of the saints, in the satsang, by doing that, we can change our karmas, we can change our destiny. Joy to you. Thank you for joining us this evening. God bless you.